It's been long in coming, but it's finally here. Yesterday, big news from our international bondholders that agreement has been reached in principle with them to restructure a huge part of our debt, $13.1 billion, we were told. This is significant, and really it is a bonanza. Considering where we've come from and where we actually arrived at yesterday, it is a big deal indeed. The analysts have said so, but is it really a question of deferred pain? We're going to get into that, even as the Finance Ministry and government prepares to close this immediately. Now, 18 months it has been since this started. And that tells you that we've been traveling along this route for quite a long time. But if you put it in the context of other countries, this is very fast indeed. Considering the hole we're trying to dig ourselves out of, this is really fast. And the global community is beginning to indeed rally round to the fact that this path towards recovery is now very clear. And you've heard from the president already saying, now this will lay the foundation for the economy to take off. And already some of the indicators are showing that we are exceeding expectations when it comes to our recovery. So that 18 months journey has been long, has been tough, has been painful for a whole host of people. And if you're traveling on this journey, you'll go all the way back to December 2022. That's when we had that default. When we're talking about our international creditors, we stopped paying them because we simply could not afford to pay, right? That in many sense will say a country declaring bankruptcy. We can no longer pay our debt. And then we said in March in 2023 that let's engage international bondholders because we can't pay. They know we can't pay, but let's strike some form of agreement because they've loaned us the money. We've used the money for something. So we did that and started engagement in March. And then we said in January, let's stay there a bit more. Let's see if we can get an agreement in principle, which is what we managed to get in January with our bilateral creditors. And that was a good one for us indeed when it comes to bilateral creditors. And then you come to March of 2024. There we saw the formal talks with international bondholders. And many said this was going to be far more complex, far more difficult than what we've had even on the domestic front, where a lot of us received significant cuts to what we originally bargained for when we signed up for government bonds, etc. And even the bilateral conversation, China and France chairing that committee, many said this is going to be far more difficult. It's going to drag a bit more. Then we saw in April 2024 that the bondholders had put forward an initial proposal. And considering the goodwill that Ghana has, the international community in the West in particular, France, but also the UK, the US, all of them were in our corner, trying to make a case for us. And no wonder we saw yesterday where the finance minister telling us that we now have this agreement in principle. Now, that's a very important point, but I need to show you what the numbers tell us. And the numbers tell a very interesting story of the debt that we've restructured. Let's start with the domestic debt. We're talking about some 203 billion cedis. And you cannot forget that on this show we did many programs when we started the domestic debt exchange, right? And its impact on everybody and the protests that we saw in this country across the globe, across the globe indeed, because there are people who were outside the country who had put in money in buying government bonds who again complained. We saw the bond forums that were formed, myself affected because of bonds. It was risk-free, we were told, until of course this happened. So that 203 billion the government wants to restructure. 5.4 billion is the bilateral debt that we also managed to strike a deal with the many countries over. China and France obviously share that particular one. That has been deferred though to 2026. So we will pay this. We're not going to pay it now. Now 13.1 billion is what we are talking about when it comes to the commercial debt that we've now struck a deal to restructure. Then something else that is important that we need to pay attention to is, so what savings have we made? 61 billion is what the government made from the domestic debt exchange restructure that we did. We're now talking about some $2 billion from the bilateral debt and then some $4.7 billion from the commercial debt. But let's put it in context. Yesterday, the statement that came in from on this matter clarified that this $4.7 billion we're talking about, it's the period that these debts were supposed to last. But then you also have the cuts that the bilateral creditors themselves, the commercial creditors themselves were taking for us. They're taking a significant hit on our behalf. Indeed. So we are saving a bit more. $4.7 billion wiped off currently. The president put it interestingly today. He said debt that has been cancelled, $4.7 billion. There's a question that has been asked. Should we be celebrating what we've seen over the last 24 hours? Should we be celebrating? And that is an important point to look at. But this, for the president, is positive because you're saving this amount. It's been cancelled. So what do you use this for? And we'll come to the question that we need to ask. Remember that we'll pay this when it resumes down the line, right? We're going to pay this. How are we going to raise the money to pay this when it's due? Do you create a buffer? Do you have a sinking fund? What exactly is the government strategy and what should it be? Tonight we'll have the former finance minister with us who set up something very similar to deal with this particular issue. Join us. That's why we're bringing him for a conversation. So please stay with us as we unpack this a bit more. The cash flow that's going to come to us is $4.4 billion. The options that, of course, the various international bondholders will now have to consider. There are two options. The option one is what you see there, the par bonds that you have to consider. And you have option two, which is the disco bonds. Now, the reason why this is important is, although this agreement in principle has been reached, government will now have to do consent solicitation. In other words, people, the bondholders individually must sign on, must agree to take one of these two options. And you want as many people as possible to take that option, that any one of these two options. And then, of course, you can be home and dry. But we know that if you decide to take the par bonds option, we are talking about no haircut. We're talking about 1.5% interest rate. First installment coming in January 2036. We have a maturity of January 2037. So again, this gives us a clear sense of when we can begin to start paying some of the interest that we have. And then you go to the disco bonds. That's where the haircut is, 37% haircut. That is strong and severe. I remember talking to the late John Kuma at the early stages of this, and he was suggesting the government was going to propose a 30% haircut to the international bondholders. At the time, it was greeted with uproar. But look at where they ended up, 37% haircut. So that is significant indeed. 5% interest rates and maturities all the way to from July 2029 all the way to July 2035. So they are taking quite a beating there on this particular investment that have been made on the subject. Now, and then you go to a bit more of the breakdown, right? The terms of these Euro bonds, the initial payments. We are going to do this down payment to the bonds 2024 to 2026. Then we have the past due interest bonds from 2024 to 2030 also, right? So if you look at the expected interest payments, and this year we're going to be paying some $12 million on the par bonds for 2024. And then you have $169 million for the disco bonds, a total of $181 million. We should be able to find money to pay, right? We should be able to find it. But where exactly is the money going to come from to pay these amounts this year? But you're going to spread it over a period. If we are not done this, and I see this graph very interesting, if we are not done this in 2025, whoever wins this year's election was about to pay $500 million. And this was mentioned in the past. So it's a very scary period. If you're looking into the 2025 and knowing that you have to cough up this amount, 2026, it gets even worse until we strike this deal to restructure. So this is absolutely important. It's important not only for this current government, but for the government that will take over going forward. We need to cough up this in total, having restructured it, $12.45 billion on an average annually. we are having to cough up $958 million. So again, somebody must pay this. Where is the money going to come from to pay when it is due? It is so fundamental to ask that question, even as government tell us that the economy is going to make a quick turnaround. And again, we also need to be a bit more aggressive in this consent solicitation, because you want as many people to sign on, as I said at the beginning of this. But there's something else I need to bring to your attention. Whilst we're negotiating and restructuring our debt, we haven't stopped borrowing. We haven't. We've counted at least 10 loans that we've gone in and secured since 2022 alone, right? So again, that tells you a story. We still need to run the affairs of state, and government is still borrowing. At least you're talking about $2.69 billion that we've borrowed. Whilst you restructure, we say we can't pay. We broke, we bankrupt, restructure so we can find a way and give us some relief so we can pay you. We're still borrowing $2.69 billion worth. We'll be paying the restructured debt, but we also have to pay this. Key question again, where do you find the money to pay this additional loans that we've taken on over the period? It is so simple a question, but one that I'm very curious to know what my guests say about. And if you want to break them down, the whole host of the loans that we've picked up, the Garrick loan, $150 million. We're talking about the first resilient recovery development one of $300 million. All of them are important. Garrick loan, for example, will deal with the flooding situation. The LA sector recovery one is important. The Accra Tema motorway project, important. $338 million of them. We need the money. We need the money. So we've gone for the loans, and we have to pay on top of everything else that we will have to pay down the line. We've deferred this pain. We've added a bit more onto it. So now the key question is government making provision to pay all these so we do not find ourselves back into the situation where we have to go back for further restructuring? That's the question you're going to be interrogating today here on PMX. Please stay with me. And PMX is always brought to you by Syntex Tanks. With me in the studio is the former Finance Minister, Seth Terkper, on a very important subject that we've been talking about since yesterday. And we'll also be joined by Dr. Thuey Champon. Is a political risk analyst and economist himself. He's watched this very, very closely indeed. Syntex Tanks is strong, it is tough. Also, as you know, is a tank that I always recommend to you every evening here on PM Express because of the quality and durability, but also they have 7 years warranty. They are across the country. Please call them on 0244 335 168 or shop online at syntexgh.com. Syntex Tanks, are strong, are tough. Now, Ghana Football Awards, get ready to witness the ultimate celebration of Ghanaian football. It's the 6th annual Ghana Football Awards. Experience an evening of unrivaled glamour and high-octane excitement at the Grand Arena as we recognize and honor the best and brightest football stars Ghana and Africa has. Now, be prepared to revel in an unforgettable night of entertainment and dazzling moments that will leave you breathless. Let's celebrate our stars on the 29th of June, a night that promises to be nothing short of extraordinary. The Ghana Football Awards is a Football Impact Africa initiative powered by Active 360 and proudly supported by the Multimedia Group and AE Mediacom. Sponsors are the Club Beer, Safari Valley, the Big League Sports and Games Lounge, Ghana Football Awards, celebrating the stars of our passion. And I'm going to come to the studio now because I'm expecting to be joined by Dr. Thuey Champon for a conversation also on this. Mr. Terkper, so yesterday, when you heard the news that we've struck a deal in principle, what was your reaction? Was it the same as the finance minister who was very excited? The president today was even sounding even more excited about it, that there's been a cancellation of our debt. It's definitely worth celebrating, is it all?
Well, it's a mixed feeling for me. And if I can explain why it's a mixed feeling for me. Mm-hmm. Maybe let's say on the excitement side, wasn't so excited, but of course quite happy that this development has come, to give some break to the economy, because as you know, all the indices, were going, southward, and it wasn't something which we would have to be too happy about. So to the extent that this is opening the door for some relief, opening the door for the fund, to go to the board, which is delayed 2 months. It should have been May, early May. So we are delayed. We were delayed in going to the board for the program approval. We were delayed in going to the board for the second review. And we are delayed in first review, and we are delayed in going for the third review for these obvious reasons. But, Evans, why...
So were celebrated?
No, I said...
It's a mix.
I said mix.
Mix,
so let me tell you why,
Very briefly, because I want to hear a quick reaction to that for everybody else. But why? Why was it mixed for you?
What legacy are we leaving as a country? HIPIC was total debt forgiveness. Within 2 decades, default. And here we are being forgiven again. Is it a legacy that we want for Ghana? And I say this, with some regret and confidence in the fact that this was envisaged when we discovered oil.
When is it envisaged?
The possibility of a default, and the possibility that if we do not put certain measures in place, we will continue slipping. So when we discovered oil, there was a 1.5 year debate as to what to do with oil. And we pledged, both sides. I moved almost every section of the PRMA in Parliament. So I knew the sentiments and some of the provisions that are in the PRMA were actually from the then opposition. One, we said never should we allow cocoa, gold, extra prices to go up, then we are happy, go down, and then it's all tears. Stabilization fund. So I'm giving you the background. We said if the stabilization fund is, going high and a bit in excess, we could cap it, use it for 2 purposes. Contingency fund. We used it for the first time during the Kwame Nkrumah flooding disaster, second disaster. We did not replenish it. And as a result of which we had the Pond water down spillage, and we were found wanting. One oil field, we had some money in it, we used it, it wasn't sufficient.
So stabilization fund, then we have the contingency fund.
And then you come to the sinking fund, you can also use it.
What is the sinking fund?
There's a debt repayment.
Okay, so you create a fund to pay your debt?
Yes, because you can't just keep borrowing.
At the time you were leaving, how much did you leave in the fund?
We had used approximately 350 million to take off His Excellency President Kufuor's first bond.
Okay, and what was left?
And then we left 250, and 200 million was used by the current government to pay off the balance.
Okay, so 50.
And we did a debt restructuring backed by the bond, which is now impaired, the World Bank guaranteed bond.
Okay, stay with me, because there's a lot there to unpack. I want to quickly get my other panelists in. As I said, Dr. Choi Chama, political risk analyst. He was quoted in the Reuters report on this, but I also have Kenneth Thompson also joining us. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Dealers Finance and Leasing Company. And I want to bring him in first before I hear from Theo. And Ken Thompson, when you hear the Finance Minister celebrate and the President also celebrate, what was your reaction when you heard that on the back of what we've achieved with the restructuring with the international creditors?
Can you hear me?
I can loud and clear, yes.
I don't know whether it's politics. I don't know whether it's trickery. I don't know whether it's, I really don't care. Because let me give you an analogy. Ghana is suffering from diarrhea. The Finance Minister is putting pampers on Ghana and telling the whole world that the diarrhea will cease. And we all know that the pampers cannot stop the diarrhea, and you need to take Imodium. So for me, I'm honestly not too sure what the arguments are. I'm a bit, maybe it's politics. But all I've heard so far, that analysts have done in all of these years, really, this is the time for Ghanaians to be very sad, because this action will not solve any of our problems. It won't solve any of our problems. I mean, what are our problems? Businesses are collapsing. Young people have no jobs. Prices are rising through the roof, gone through the roof. If you were earning 3,000 6 years ago and you are earning 4,005 now, that money is worth less than 1,005 today. You can't survive. Our roads have potholes. It's a litany of issues. And how does this solve any of our problems? I mean, Ghana is required to downsize from a house in cantonments with 6 bedrooms to 1 bedroom in Abukobi. And somebody gives you some money to help with the transition, and you celebrate. Is it politics? Is it that we don't understand the issues? We talk about the fact that I've heard the finance minister say that this is going to result in critical infrastructure. Where's the money coming from? And
but the savings you're making from this, 4.7
billion. Let me get to it. That is completely wrong analysis. You can't pay your debt. You owe somebody 100 cedis. He says, okay, pay me 50 plus interest. You say, I'm saving 50, and I'm going to use that 50. Where's that 50 coming from? That analysis, that thing should never, ever, ever be repeated. It doesn't exist. You think if we had 4.7 billion to give away, the creditors would not take their money? And we forget that the money that we borrow are people's pension funds, people's investments. I mean, I've been in the business of lending money. Writing off debt is not a small matter. And we've got to face the issue, deal with the reality, and not put pampers on Ghana. It's not going to work. Is it politics? I mean, I'm missing the point. Is it politics? Is it that we don't really care? Is it that we're more interested in the photo ops than actually dealing with the issues? But for me, nothing has been said to give me any hope that the next few years will not be rough. Nothing has been said. Absolutely nothing.
Well, stay with me, because we need to explore in quite some great detail how we pay when they are due, because this is we'll have to pay. And Theo Champon, let me bring you in here. You've heard the former finance minister, Mensah Tekpa, we've had the finances, Ken Thompson on this. How significant is this deal then for the Ghanaian economy in terms of our path towards recovery?
Oh, I think it's important, and I don't think that the view that it won't solve any of our problems is fully borne out by the different sort of data points. So we have to understand, like Uncle Seth was saying, that it's been a very difficult and painful 2 years for the country, right? Starting in December 2022, when we actually defaulted, and actually even earlier, when there was a run on the CD, and then we had to run to the IMF eventually, and all of that, right? 3 things have happened in the process, so in the 18 months leading up to this. The first one was the domestic debt restructuring. Very painful for domestic creditors. Then we had the external bilateral restructuring in January of this year, and eventually culminated in the MOU beginning of June, right, of this year, a few weeks ago. And the biggest bottleneck in terms of getting us over the hurdle or the finish line was how you restructure your commercial debt, because that's like 13 billion out of about 22 or 20 billion of the total external debt portfolio that you're restructuring, right? And that was actually quite significant in that sense. And the concern was that given what we're seeing with other delayed restructuring and other processes and the impact that this was having on the local economy. So remember, some of the even road projects we're told had actually been stalled or delayed because of this thing to deal with the debt restructuring and how eventually you're going to repay back. So to the extent that you're actually 18 months down the line, are almost near the completion line. We're not there yet because the agreement still has to be signed on and it's got to be approved by the OCC, the Official Credit Card Committee, chaired by France and China, and then eventually it finds its way into the next review of the IMF program. But to the extent that you're actually at a point where you're getting closure on this, and then you can begin to focus on the difficult task of actually rebuilding the economy, rebuilding the fiscal buffers, whatever potential savings that you're getting in interest and principal repayments, right, down the line, or monies that you had to use to service these debt obligations in the future, being channeled into other sectors within the economy. And that's the conversation we need to have. How do we ensure that going forward, the amounts that would have been used for these savings that we're now getting is actually used properly, and we don't find ourselves back to the position that we find ourselves in.
And really, that is a fundamental question we are asking. Yeah, but what you say about Ken Thompson's point, that the savings is not necessarily money in our pockets that you can rechannel to something else.
No, but a government is not a private company, right? In the sense that you're still getting inflows as we speak. You've gotten $250 million from the World Bank. There is still money. So, for example, next year you would have had to repay over $1 billion. One of the Eurobonds was actually maturing next year.
Yeah.
There's a couple more in 27, 28.
Yeah, you have $500 million that we have to pay in 2025.
Yes, and these are amounts that now, under the restructured terms that are yet to be agreed to, right? You have these two flavors of bonds where, for example, you would have been paying about 7-8% coupon on them. Now you're going to potentially pay up to 5%, right, coupon on them. And you can actually work out what the net effect is in terms of savings. So, for example, under the bilateral one that we did, effectively, the haircut was about 38%, right? Basically, you're getting 62 cents on the dollar. On the April one that was rejected with the commercial creditors, it was about 29% effective haircut. And they said that is not close to the 38 that the bilateral creditors were offering. If you work out the new proposal that is on the table and you work out the numbers, it comes out to about 37%, right? Nominal haircut, or in other words, you're getting about 63 cents, right, on the dollar for the creditors in that sense. But that creates a lot of room as a government going forward in terms of monies that you would have actually had to now use, either print or go and borrow new money or whatever it was to service these, debt obligations. So I think that actually going forward, it does give us room to get a bit more liquidity, right, within the economy. But then the more important point, which Seth was talking about, is what safeguards do we put in to ensure that we don't go back to this perennial issue of defaulting and then having to restructure, our debt. That is one of the big issues in the room, and I think there are some proposals on that we can come to, but putting some thinking funds.
I'll come to that. For me, it's a fundamental point, and I showed earlier that it's not like we stopped borrowing when we stopped paying our debt, when we froze it. We've been borrowing since then, and there's a huge amount there. So you have to put it all together and have the conversation. How do you then find the money to pay, considering that we've told our creditors that we don't have money, we are broke, so forgive us part of our debt, and we borrowed a bit more. But I'll come to Seth quickly in the studio, but Mr. Thompson, quickly respond to that for me, because that is, in essence, for the ordinary man, listening to the politicians talk about this, it's as if we are out of jail here, and the economy is now going to take off. The roads and the infrastructure will also climb up, and then we'll see the city, and that's an important point. We're going to see the city strengthening against the dollar. The finance minister made that point. That definitely is true, is it not? Because that's money that would have been paying, using the small CDs we have to chase the big dollar, and that would have put additional pressure.
I mean, for my sins, I'm an accountant, so I understand numbers. I can assure you, and I've been speaking about the Ghanaian economy since 2014, that as sure as night follows day, This $300 million dollars or so that the IMF is giving us is only papering the cracks. Nothing will change. Absolutely nothing will change. And as Ghanaians, we have to start thinking that the next 10 years will be rough. I mean, what are we talking about savings? When has government ever met its revenue targets anyway? And you think the creditors are so dumb that if there's money, they do not take it? Why should they give us a free ride? These are commercial creditors. There's nothing anybody will say, nothing anybody can tell me that will even make me think for 1% that anything will change. The currency is not going to change. You think the currency is going to go back? You know, all that's going to happen is that as soon as the money comes in, the currency will stabilize. We'll have some stability, but just wait till after elections. I mean, if we're not able to solve our problems with over $10 billion in 6 years, we're going to solve it to 300 million? Guys, come on, let's be real. Let's really be real. And I've heard these economists go on and on and on and on. And after the event, they come and try to tell us what happened. I can assure you that's not going to happen. When has government ever met its revenue targets? When? I mean, there's what you do on paper, and like as an accountant, I can make the spreadsheet say anything I like. And that's what actually happens. And go back all the years. When have we ever met our targets? It's not possible. So let's think about reality. Let's know that the next 10 years is going to be very rough. There's going to be very little money for the government to do much. We are cut out of the international capital markets. I mean, that's how we've been able to show up our city and develop do some development projects. And we've got to find ways and means to cut expenditure and increase income. How we do that, that's a different discussion. But I can assure you that for so long as night follows day, nothing will change. Absolutely. And wait till after election. Just wait. You'll see what will happen.
I mean, Mr. Tekwe, there are real tangible issues at play here, and for the ordinary Ghanaian, and there's a reason why we need to have this conversation. If you bring this down to the micro level, the CD's depreciation has been referenced as one of the immediate areas we'll see an impact. Surely, if we're going to be resuming paying our Eurobonds, that would have tanked the CD even further. You don't disagree with that? Now that that is not going to happen, you're going to see stability. You're going to see the CD gain some strength.
At the time we were putting $500 million US dollars aside in 2014, 2015, because remember crude oil prices had dropped. But that was because we knew that if we won the 2017 elections, we were going to cough $750 million US dollars, the first sovereign bond. 2007 to 2017, 10 years, we had not paid a penny of the principal. That explains the sinking fund that didn't we need the money going into elections? Didn't we need that money? Were we not doing infrastructure and others? Yet, we managed to put, even with crude oil prices, money aside, right? And I'm saying that the restructuring, the refinancing that we did of the first sovereign bond was for $200 million because we had paid off with our own cash, 336, approximately 350, right? And then the current government came in, took $200 million of the balance, which was left, that is 350, let me just approximate it, 350 plus 200, left with 200, paid it off on October 4th, October 2017. And with this experience, and with 3 oil fields, remember the investments that was taken up, right? So let's just prorate it, considering that we did it out of an average of 70,000 barrels, per 70,000 barrels per day. Our 3 fields gave us an average until recently of 190,000 barrels. Why didn't we at least triple? So why didn't we put in even 500 as we were borrowing, that would have been 1.5. Evans, we would probably not be, even if we worse off than where we are now. I'm saying that these are things which were done. Stabilization fund, in addition. Remember, we had a global financial crisis. We had SARS in the region. It didn't affect us directly. But we said that, collectively, crises are inevitable. They are either your domestic crisis or they are your external crisis. Evans, when we got COVID, what were the first funds that we took? It wasn't the IMF loan. Was it not the stabilization fund of 250 million, which we left, which went to Parliament? To date, we have withdrawn almost 500 million from the stabilization fund instead of restoring the cap so that more money will flow into it. We put in
there are too many competing needs on this subject, right?
No, I'm addressing.
Considering where the economy is.
No.
The Ukraine crisis, you mentioned it, the pandemic that we haven't experienced. The government will have to still spend.
Wait a minute, we had
in dealing with these crises.
I know, I don't accept it.
The reason why they have not managed.
No, I have never accepted. I have never accepted it. The reason being that for COVID, IMF loan 1 billion, SDR from IMF 1 billion within that period, Bank of Ghana 1.7 billion US dollars equivalent. Count it, 3.7. World Bank, African Development Bank, put together almost 1 billion. Development partners. We got almost 6 billion to resolve COVID. Did any government since 1992 ever get 1 billion to turn around the economy? The highest until we got the 3 billion under this ECF was 950 by President Mahama. Remember, the current administration took over that. So in addition to the sinking fund, stabilization fund, which I'm talking about, because it overlapped the elections, this current government was the one that benefited from, the last 2 tranches. So what are we talking about? We are blaming COVID when we had all this money.
Let's come to the reality of this restructured.
I'll come to it, but I'm talking reality.
Yeah.
Look, if we don't learn from history, we may think that it is impossible.
Well, where we are now is that we've struck a deal in principle. We're going back to the IMF board on the 28th of June. We're now looking at how does this lay the path towards recovery, as far as you see it?
Yes, I'm telling you the path. I'm saying that we had the first sovereign bond, we hadn't been paying, we're only paying interest. So I'm saying that with oil, we started laying a certain path.
Yeah, okay. So
and with 3 oil fields,
you made the point, but I'm interested now in asking that fundamental question.
Precisely.
We will still pay. A lot of it is deferred.
We must cut expenditure.
Okay.
We are living beyond our means. It's just like a household. We must cut expenditure. We must be realistic. Look, I don't come from a rich background, so I know what it means to be poor, to go to school. Right? I know. So I'm not talking as somebody who is so affluent, coming from a very affluent background, and therefore I'm insensitive to the plight. I couldn't have gone to school. I said in my profile, with your this and that, I passed pre-sec. For a Presbyterian to pass pre-sec and not go, was it an easy job? Right?
So
but the point I'm making is that let's be realistic. Our expenditure, free and teachers and all those things, they are just, exceedingly high.
The finance minister had said last week that he's going to Parliament with a plan that will create a buffer in anticipation that we'll be paying these loans.
The first time he said it.
Do you back that?
Of course, because the first time he said it, he mentioned sinking fund. So there is a lesson to be learned there. That is the part I was talking about, that if we had 1 oil field and we were able to set up 550, right, granted, we could have set up another, 1.5 from 3 oil fields. Because remember, the drafters of the Constitution, who put the provision, even though they said may in the Constitution, included finance ministers, included others, who knew, that as a country, you need that buffer.
I need to ask you something. In the midst of our debt crisis, whilst we stop paying our commercial creditors, We were still borrowing, as I just showed on my slide there. Since 2020, we counted at least 10 more loans we picked on, more than 2 billion there. Does that surprise you as a former finance minister, or?
Yeah, it's surprising
to
anybody. Yes, of course.
Okay. Why?
Of course, why? We had to slow down borrowing. You heard President Mahama, to his credit, say that, in 2016, when we did the last bond, it was for 750. It was oversubscribed by about 2 billion. We could also have gone for SS. It was oversubscribed. But we stuck to 750. Right? And crude oil prices and others have fallen. Because we were on a path. We were on a path where we were managing debt. We had paid off, with the 2015 bond and the restructuring and the HIP, which we had done. Yeah, we were on a path, and you know the numbers. I don't want to be repeating them. 57%, deficit was 6.1%. I don't think that we should always also use a broad brush as if let's accentuate the positive. I don't mind whether the positive is from MPP or it's from NDC. Let's accentuate the positive.
Do we have enough between now and 2016 and beyond to pay these debts we've restructured?
I was just going to come to
just a second. To pay these that we've restructured, in addition to the additional ones that we've also picked on since 2022, from what you said, do we have the resources to pay up?
We can do the profile. How much is our revenue going to come and whatever.
Knowing what do we have?
Well, we probably have. We have 3 oil fields. If we get an additional one, but if we didn't do it, in the last, few years, was a guarantee. That's the point.
Where should the money come from to fill the sinking fund?
Oh, it's in the law. The law says that when you get the oil revenue, right, when you get the oil revenue, you cater for GMPC, right, needs, the most important being equity calls. It's not for distribution to do whatever. It's for equity calls so that we could be able to take more shares. Once you are done with that, then you must put 70% into the budget of the balance. Of that 70%, you must dedicate 70% of the 70, which is about 50% of the total revenue, towards capital infrastructure. Right? Because it was all haphazard and rent, that's the reason we set up the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund for self-financing projects to leverage that money to borrow, eventually.
Such as the Terminal 3.
As that Terminal 3.
Yeah.
Port expansion.
Yep.
You may fault it to one extent, but at least there's an innovation in there that we did not have to issue a guarantee, right? But we took the forex that is coming from that project, to backstop, and it is self-financing and it is working.
Okay. Please stay with me.
Let me just
quickly, because I need to get them to on this very important question.
Yes, I appreciate that. So I'm saying that on the distribution, that's what I want to understand. Then it says that 21% should go into a stabilization fund. And 9% should go into the heritage fund. Do you remember that had it not been for Ghanaians who stood against using the heritage fund for free HSS, the heritage fund itself would have been depleted.
Okay, so those are the sources
and we would have been, and today we are going to be giving these debts that we're talking about to future generations.
Let me bring in Dr. Church-Ampon. That question is now very critical because, yes, we're approaching a deal, but this will have to pay 2026 and beyond. We'll have to pay. Some of them actually we have to start paying this year. How do we pay that? And while at that, give me your comment on the additional debt we've accumulated while we were struggling with our creditors to get them to forgive us our debt and restructure some and defer some. We're still borrowing quite a bit. More than 2 billion we've accumulated over the period. How does that all sit in what we've been doing over the last few years?
You were locked out of the capital markets, and so you had to resort to the domestic markets and others to fill the void. But I am more concerned now, and rightfully, on the long-term sort of fiscal sustainability. And let me actually give you 2 numbers to put this into context, right? So from the statement we've seen from yesterday, we're actually getting a cash flow relief of about 4.4 billion, right, over the next 3 years, which is what you would have had to pay in interest and principal and all of that. But we would not, or we are not doing enough to actually ensure that we would have money, one, to service the debt that would accrue, but we're actually also even taking more. So I'll give you 2 examples, and you can our listeners can check this. There are two news stories from the last 2 weeks, where one, the government is thinking of taking $2 billion from the Koreans, and then another $1.75 billion from Afri-Exim Bank, right? Together, that's $3.75 billion, which is almost as much as the relief that you're going to get from this external Eurobond restructuring, right, over the next 3 years, right? So in one sense, you're getting some fiscal space being created. But if you don't really have any checks and balances that constrain the borrowing, and borrowing, if you even have to tie to actual delivery of, infrastructure that or goods that actually ends up improving the productive base of the economy, like the Terminal 3 and things that we're talking about, and you end up still spending on recurrent spending and etc. This little space that we've gotten for ourselves in the next 2-3 years, it's all going to vanish. So by the time you actually exit the IMF program in 2026, 2027, your debt to GDP and other numbers may actually never come down. So in other words, you won't go to the capital markets to borrow. You're not going to do Eurobonds. But if you're still getting other bilateral loans, Afri-Exim and others, even if it is 1%, it still would add on, right, to your public debt bill. So fundamentally, then, it becomes really, what do you do? I think the sinking fund, absolutely, we've got to go back to reestablish that, have regular payments going in to service both interest and principal. I also, number two, think that the government should be clear to us in terms of its communication. What I mean by that is that whatever savings that we're making under both the bilateral and the commercial, right, we need to see the detailed breakdown of the interest and the principal repayments, and it will be a way to actually sense check the government. And number two, what these savings are going to be used for. So under HIPIC, there was a program, and we saw HIPIC toilet, etc. Let us see the so-called savings that have been made in the 3 years under these two programs, right? Let us see a program of action that will translate into what they are used for to improve the economic base of the country. But if you don't have a plan on how you're going to service your debt going forward, if you don't have a plan to have a clear business case of your borrowings, and in one sense, you're getting $4.4 billion, but you already are thinking of getting an additional $3.75 billion of loans, then whatever you're getting is almost going to vanish in 2 or 3 years' time.
And Mr. Ken Thompson, that same question to you. Do you see a realistic path towards full debt recovery where our debt is dropped down to sustainable levels? And when the debt repayments fall due, even with a restructuring, we'll be in a position to pay?
Well, I haven't seen any data. I haven't seen information with respect to sustainability of the debt. I haven't seen anything. But I think what I'd like to get across is that our politicians and our economists try and confuse us. It's about income and expenditure. If you spend more than you have, you get into trouble. And that's why we're in trouble. If you ask me, I know that it's going to be difficult for us to meet our obligations. It's going to be difficult. And we'll have to make some sacrifices. That's all I can say. But it's going to be difficult.
Any recommendation when it's sacrifices? Because we have to pay. We will have to pay. Yes, we have some relief and some respite, some savings, but we still have to pay down the line. Any recommendations on what the politicians should be doing to get ready for that?
Our politicians don't have a track record of doing anything that is painful, but we've got to cut costs. It's so obvious. It's income and expenditure. And whether you're an individual, whether you're a country, whether you're a business, you say, this is my income, this is my expenditure, and you make assumptions. We've got to cut cost. How many times do we need to say this? If I was president, I'll put all the MPs in a pickup. We can't afford the 4-wheel drives. We can't afford to travel business class. We can't afford to do projects that deliver no return. We've got to live within our means. And how long should we be saying this? It's income and expenditure. You can slice it any way you like. And you can put diapers on it, but the diarrhea will still flow. You've got to take Imodium. I mean, all we've been doing over these years is just, kicking the ball forward and hoping that the issues don't crystallize during the person's term. That's all we've been doing. It's about income and expenditure. Let's keep it simple. And unless you are able to cut expenditure or increase income or do both, we are going nowhere. And for a country that imports everything, I mean, so, even if the debts we have to pay only half, I mean, how does that improve the rate? Nobody's going to give us money. So there are big issues that are not going to be addressed. But we have to know that there are issues that have to be addressed.
Okay.
The reality is the reality. Yes, the reality is the reality. We've got to cut expenditure. And we cannot raise more taxes because the citizens are up to their neck with taxes. We can't afford to live.
Yeah, and talking about taxes, we've seen what has been happening in Kenya today with the protest already. Ken Thompson, thank you very much. I'm grateful also that you joined me. Angus Tepe, I'm grateful always for joining me. You have some suggestions in there. You should be offering, write a paper on your thoughts on how we can. You've been writing a paper.
I don't hide my views.
Okay.
You know that I do.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.